Hi, I'm David from Not Brewing, and today I'm going to show you from grain to glass how I made a clone beer of Janet's Brown. What's Janet's Brown? Well, this was a beer first brewed by Mike McDole, who was known in the homebrew world as Tasty. Sadly, Tasty passed away on October the 4th, 2020 after a brave battle with cancer. This beer was named after Tasty's late wife Janet, who always loved this recipe. So my brewing it in a way is a tribute to a tribute. Rest in peace, Tasty. It's a recipe that received great publicity when it took gold at the 2004 National Homebrew Competition in the US. In 2009, Tasty took gold again at the NHC with an updated higher ABV version that he categorised as Imperial Brown Ale. This award-winning recipe was also featured in Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer's book Brewing Classic Styles as an example of a bigger, hoppier American brown ale. While not strictly totally in the style guidelines for an American brown, it's probably the closest category. It's best described as a bold, hoppy brown with flavours of chocolate and some caramel and nuts thrown in. Without further ado, let's have a look at the recipe that makes up this beer. I will be making an 11.5 litre batch, which is 3 US gallons, and for that I need a few different malts. The bulk of the mash, 75%, is made up of crisp extra pale ale malt, a British base malt. To that I'll be adding 7.8% of crisp crystal 100, that's 100 EBC, 400 Lovibond. And this is the caramel malt to provide a little toffee, caramel flavour and a little sweetness in the nose. Then to that I'm adding 3.1% of crisp chocolate malt, around 900 EBC, so quite dark, but not as roasty or bitter as roasted barley or black pattern malt. On top of that goes 6.2% crisp pale wheat malt, which contributes to better head retention and makes for a slightly richer feel in the mouth. And finally, I'm adding 7.8% of Viaman Carapils. This is dextrin style malt. Dextrin is an unfermentable sugar, so while it doesn't affect colour or flavour, it again adds mouthfeel and head retention to the beer. There's a lot of hops in this beer. 18 grams of Northern Brewer is added to the mash. Now, this is unusual because hops are normally added to the boil. Adding hops to the mash will yield less bitterness, but will show up a smooth aroma and flavour. A little confession. I actually forgot to add these hops in the mash, so I added them at the end of the boil in the whirlpool. More Northern Brewer is added at 60 minutes and at 15 minutes. Cascade hops are then added at 10 minutes and at flame out when the heat is turned off the boil. This is when I added those forgotten mash hops. Oops. Finally, some Centennial is added as a dry hop. Dry hopping is the act of adding hops to the beer while it is fermenting. When the fermentation is starting to slow down around day 3 or 4, these hops are added to the fermenter to add a really fresh aromatic hop character to the beer. For the yeast, I'm using Fermentis Safale US05 dry yeast, an American ale yeast. This should attenuate well and drop quickly to leave a clear beer with a clean flavour. I've also included my target water profile. Remember, if you're using tap water, sprinkle half a Camden tablet in beforehand to remove the chlorine from the water. Without further ado, let's get brewing. So looking at the ingredients we need for this batch, here's the crushed grain. This is bought from themaltmiller.co.uk. Here's the various hops provided in vacuum sealed foil packages. And here's the Safale US05 American ale yeast. And that's it from the ingredients. So this is the mash phase. Heat up 8.91 litres of mash water to 74 degrees. Put the grain bag in and then slowly add the crushed grain, an amount at a time. Pour it directly in and do it in sections. Make sure that you thoroughly stir the mash
so that you avoid dough balls or clumps of dry grain. You want every grain covered with water. And then pop the lid on, start the mash timer for an hour. You notice that just stirring the mash means that the temperatures come down to 67, which is perfect. I cover it in a blanket, and then every 15 minutes I'll lift off the lid, give it a stir just to make sure that things are mixed around and the temperature's equalized a bit more. At the 15-minute stage, I'll also dip a pH strip in to check that the pH is in the right zone. At the end of the hour, I'll take the thermometer out and lift up the bag out of the grains, and somewhat clumsily, as I'll demonstrate here, I'll put a colander underneath it and let it rest for 5-10 minutes just to drain out before I move the bag to a plastic container where I'm going to do my sparging. So in the other two pans you can see there, I'm heating up sparge water to 77 degrees, at which point then I'll take it jug at a time and pour it through the bag sat on the colander on top of my plastic container. And this is the sparge process. This is rinsing out the sugars from the grains to make sure we get every last drop of fermentable wort out of it. When I'm finished, I then put the black gloves on, the heat resistant gloves, and I will squeeze the bag to get the last bit of wort out of the bag. Don't be afraid to give it a big squeeze here and get as much out as you can, despite any controversy about this. At this point, I'll take a couple of drops of the wort before boiling to get a pre-boil gravity. I put it on my refractometer, put it to my eye, and this is what I can see, which tells me on the right hand side that the pre-boil gravity is 1057. While heating up the water in the kettle to boiling point, I will weigh out my hops. So I put each of the different hop additions, 60-minute, 15-minute, 10-minute, and flame out into separate pots. You'll notice that as the kettle is coming to the boiling point, there's a layer of protein that's come out of solution sat on top, and then at the point of boiling you'll notice there's a break in that layer on top. At this point I tend to stir in that protein to reintegrate back into the wort. That'll eventually drop back into solution. You can start your timer for 60 minutes and now add your 60-minute hop addition. I put them inside a muslin bag, drop them in, swirl them about a bit, and let the boil continue. At 15 minutes, I'll add some more hops and I'll put my wort chiller inside the wort to sterilize it. At flame out, I'll turn off the heat at the end of the 60 minutes, but I'll add some more hops, which will sit in the solution as the wort cools. From this point on, everything that touches the wort needs to be sanitized, so I'll put the lid back on to stop things dropping in. I'll transfer the pot to the kitchen sink. I'll connect up the hoses on the wort chiller, start the water, and then monitor the temperature as it drops. Every now and then, as you'll see here, I'll stir the wort just to equalize the temperature in the pot. The wort next to the chiller gets cold, but you want the temperature even throughout. Once the temperatures drop down to 19 degrees, I'll disconnect the wort chiller, lift it out. I'll squeeze out the hop bag here. There was quite a lot of fluid absorbed by the hop pellets, so I want some of that and all its associated flavour to go back into the wort, obviously to make the beer taste lovely. And then I'll lift the pot out onto the side. This is the time when I can use my ruler to measure the pre-boil volume in the pot, measure the post-boil volume, and take a few drops onto the refractometer just to check what the original gravity of the beer is prior to fermentation. As you can see here, it's gone up from 1057 to 1064, which is exactly where it needs to be. Then I'll transfer all of the wort from the kettle to the fermenter. I'll sanitize a funnel and a sieve and rest them on top And you'll notice that I'm pouring the kettle from a height here, which is creating some splashing. You can see the foaming of the beer inside the glass fermenter. This is so that oxygen is integrated into the wort, because yeast really like oxygen at the beginning, so they can replicate and grow to have a sufficiently large population to be able to consume all of the sugar in the wort. I'll sanitize a pair of scissors and the yeast packet itself, and then drop it inside the fermenter. You can just sprinkle it on top, but then after that, I like to do a little bit more aeration. So I'll put the top on and I'll shake up the vessel to get some more air in and to integrate the yeast into the wort. I do this for about a minute. Then I'll put the airlock in and I'll move the fermenter to a place in the house with even temperature. I tend to use the cupboard under the stairs. After about 3 or 4 days, as the fermentation is slowing down a little, it's time to dry hop. This is as simple as taking the lid off the fermenter, dropping in the final hop addition and resealing the lid. I then let the fermentation go to a full 2 weeks to finish off, and then transfer to a keg, force carbonate for a week or two until the beer is perfect. The final gravity ended up at 1016, which makes the ABV a hearty 6.4%. Right, let's go on and taste the beer.
Hello all, so here we are at the tasting. There it is, just been poured from the keg. Get a close look at that, and if you can see the tight creamy head on it. In terms of clarity of the beer, I don't know if you can see, but it's pretty clear, which I'm happy with. It turned out at 6.4%, so after 2 weeks fermenting, I put it in the keg and I force carbonated it at 12.5 psi for a couple of weeks basically. You may be wondering why I put it in this glass. You've got a better chance of seeing through it in a thin glass, so I thought that might be helpful to have a look at. So appearance wise, it's brown, it's clear, it's got a tight little bubbled velvety head on top. Looks really good. Nose, I've got citric, stone fruit, hops, huge hop aroma with this chocolate maltiness as well. The smell really makes me want to drink it. Okay, well, without further ado, let's have another sip. Okay, it's hugely refreshing. You would not know this was over 6%. This has no hotness, no alcoholic heat at all. When it's in the mouth, you get this nuttiness and the malt. It's sort of like toasty bread crust, but with a little bit of caramel as well. As it then goes on through the mouth, the malt stays strong, and then the hop aroma, the hop flavours come through, and then it finishes with a beautiful bitter finish. This is one smooth experience. Yeah, strong malt. Chocolate actually rises towards the end, and then at the bitter finish you've got, it's like dark chocolate, like a bitter chocolatey edge. I'm very happy with that. As I said before, rest in peace Tasty. Thanks for leaving an amazing recipe, an amazing brewing legacy. I will definitely be brewing this again. If you like the content, then like and subscribe to the channel, which helps me to make more of the same. Feel free to make comments. I'd love to hear some feedback from you guys. Till next time, happy brewing.